Welcome to another episode of Talking Hoops. Jason Andera from Midco Sports alongside Michael McCleary of the Argus Leader. And we've done it. We've made it to the postseason. There's a couple classes that have already started their regional tournaments, and the rest of them, just a couple days away, if not a week away, for some of these teams to start fighting their way toward a championship. Michael, first of all, how's it going?
It's going good. Playoff basketball this week. That's been fun. So yeah, I'm really excited for all the classes to start get into it with these regional games, and state tournaments right around the corner. I'm looking forward to it.
Here we go. It's time to get going. There's 1 week left of action in AA and Boys A, and the rest of the action in and Boys B actually has another week left of a couple makeup games, but they don't have much left as far as on the schedule. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. But we are going to talk today, not only go through all the classes like we always do, we're also going to throw out a couple Player of the Year contenders. And there's still a few weeks left to kind of figure out who maybe deserves that Player of the Year in each class. And of course, we have our own awards. The Argus has their first five, and a lot of these players are under consideration as we go, and always love feedback from you guys too, if you have any agreements or disagreements as far as where we go with that. Let's start in Boys AA like we always do. And last night, Lincoln took on Washington, part two. These are two teams that seem to be ascending toward the end of the year. Lincoln is playing some pretty good ball. They got out to a great start against Washington in the Washington gym, and it was close at halftime. And in the second half, Washington came back. Michele Cambalo had another outstanding game. He's had two big games against Lincoln now this year, and Washington finds a way to get it done. And for seeding situations, that bumped Lincoln down to number 8 and Washington up to number 3. Just reactions with that and how those teams are playing right now, Michael.
Yeah, and I seem to remember that the last Lincoln Washington game was okay, right?
It was all right.
It was mildly entertaining. But yeah, the three teams sort of in the middle of the pack right now in AA are that Jefferson, Lincoln, and Washington. And in the last week, we've had Lincoln beat Jefferson, and then Washington beat Lincoln. So you can start to see some of these seedings come into place a little bit, where these teams that are ascending at the beginning of the season are kind of settling into their place come regionals and SODAC 16, and then eventually the state tournament. So yeah, this is another exciting rendition of the Lincoln-Washington rivalry. These intercity rivalries are always really fun. But yeah, it's been fun to watch over the last couple of weeks as these kind of these teams are kind of jockey for position a little bit.
Mitchell, a team that has been in the top 5 most of the season, they've lost a couple of games that have you scratching their head because they played right alongside Roosevelt. They played alongside Washington. They played some really tough games against good teams, but then, they've beaten Aberdeen Central, but then they lost to Rapid City Stevens the other night on a last-second buzzer beater. Not sure what to make of Mitchell, but they still seem like one of those teams that could put it together at the right time. So like you said, as the seeding plays out, it's really been interesting to see where teams have fit in. But after that top 8, the 9 through 16 will be road teams in the SODAC 16. Anybody in that group able to make some noise? Maybe one of these teams will come out of nowhere. I don't know. But right now, nobody's really making a move in that group for me.
Yeah. And, I think as you said, Mitchell's been a little bit of a confusing one this year, but I think you got to give some credit to Rapid City Stevens that maybe we've been overlooking them a little bit. Obviously it came on a buzzer beater, at the end of the game, which sometimes like it's just a situational thing with those kind of things, but they had to do something to get to that position. So yeah, I think that this team could potentially be somebody worth keeping an eye on, especially after getting a win over a top 5 team, which
Right.
Mitchell was at the time. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. that 9 through 16 is definitely interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll see a road win. If we do, if the seeding stays like it is right now, it would be Rapid City Stevens visiting Mitchell for a rematch there, which would be interesting. We would have Yankton as the number 9 seed on the road against Lincoln. Right now, Yankton above 500, Lincoln right at 500. And then you've got, Pierre, I think a team that feels like when they're at their best, they can make some noise. Lincoln Keenholz had a big night the other night, over 30 points again, and going over 1,000 on his career. And, they would have a matchup against Aberdeen Central, a team I feel like they could make some noise with too. But a lot to be said seeding wise over the next week because there's still games for these AA teams. Let's touch on our players of the year, just the contenders in AA. And as you kind of look through, the list of players that have lifted their teams up to good seasons, here's who I've got. Caden Hinker. I mean, this is a guy close to the all-time leader in assists for Mitchell, one of the best all-time scorers. He's put Mitchell back on the map. A couple of years ago, Mitchell, a long time proud tradition, proud school, had kind of fallen off, and he, with his ascent, so has the school come back into contention. McCleary Kambalo, a guy who's a 20-point-a-game scorer, had some really big games this year to keep his team in contention and back into the 3rd spot. And then Marcus Phillips, every time I watch Roosevelt, he sticks out to me as their number 1 option. So best player on the best team in the state, I think deserves some recognition as well. I didn't put anybody on here from O'Gorman. Maybe I should have. There's such a team effort with them. I don't see one player as a potential player of the year candidate. Comments on any of those, Michael?
Yeah, because and player of the year is sometimes tricky, especially when you take a team like O'Gorman. Obviously, there's several players on that team that contribute to the success there. I mean, David Alpers has big games. Matt Eng is really coming into his role as a scorer, and Rush Landry has been unbelievable at times this year. But it's such a, as you say, it's such a team effort where one player can go off this game, another player can go off this game. I mean, part of the reason why O'Gorman doesn't, I guess, have one of the players that jump out as a player of the year contender is also one of the reasons why they're so good. But when you look at those three, I mean, we've talked about Caden Hinker before. I just find him so fascinating in the sense that he gets all of the defensive attention when teams go against Mitchell, and sometimes it affects his shooting percentage a little bit, but it never affects the box score. He's always putting numbers up, which is something that's really tough to do at this level. I mean, there are some really good defenders that teams can throw against him, but he's going to get his. So, that's something that's really impressive about him. But, I've watched McCleary Kambalo play some unbelievable performances, and, like you said, best player on the best team in the state. In Marcus Phillips, I mean, that's that goes a long way. So I think those are 3 guys that are really going to fight pretty hard for that trophy.
I would have to agree with you. Let's move on to boys Class A. We had a couple interesting games. One I wanted to point out: Monday night, Flandreau took on Sioux Falls Christian, and Christian, coming off of a win against Sioux Valley, maybe starting to put some things together. This one went into overtime because Tash Lundy hit one from 28 feet out to take it to overtime, and Flandreau ends up beating him 68-65 in overtime. I'm not sure what this says about these two teams, but it does say Flandreau can beat some good teams, and they were playing like a top 5 team. And it says Sioux Falls Christian, outside that top 5, but might be a team, that can play with these top teams in the state too.
Sioux Falls Christian, you could tell from the start they weren't playing to the best of their ability, and they've started to pick up some really nice wins over the last couple of weeks that have started to make you think, maybe they are a contender in Class A. Maybe not right up there with those top teams, but to play with Flandreau like they did, obviously a 3-pointer by Tash Lundy, as you mentioned, away from winning that game potentially. It's this team's for real because Flandreau's for real too. So I've been sort of mulling over what to make of Sioux Falls Christian over the past couple of weeks, and I think this past week has kind of proven that they're up there.
The quandary here is in Region 3, only 2 of those top teams make the SODAC 16. And right now you've got West Central, who's playing really good ball, but have lost a couple of games. You got Sioux Falls Christian, who seems to be ascending and can play with so many different types of teams because they have the size, they have the backcourt. And then Del Rapids, they're hanging out in this group as well. And they're 14-6. They played a really tough schedule, just above Sioux Falls Christian right now in the seedings. We got 3 really pretty potent teams that could make some noise at state, but only 2 of them can even make it to the SODAC 16. How do you see that playing out? Which 2 of those 3 teams are you leaning toward right now, Michael?
Well, I definitely I am tempted to kind of link Sioux Falls Christian and West Central together, just because West Central's win over Sioux Falls Christian at the start of the year was sort of what ascended West Central to the point that they are at their season right now. So, having those 2 teams go to the tournament, it just makes the most sense. But, Del Rapids has played really, really well. And, it's difficult with these regional formats that, we don't often come across a situation like this where, there are 3 teams that definitely deserve it. Even 4 teams maybe, but this is one of those regions that, it's just kind of stacked. So yeah, I would be hard. It'd be hard to sort of guess at this point who would make it, because I really think a lot of these teams are really close. But at this point, I'm just tempted to sort of link the West Central Sioux Falls Christian, just because just watching each team's ebbs and flows throughout the year.
That would be my lean as well. Del Rapids did beat Sioux Falls Christian back in early January, and I think those teams have both evolved since then. It's hard to compare. I mean, they both played Flandreau and both lost to Flandreau. So hard to really compare those 2 teams right now to see where they're at. Del Rapids has come off a really tough part of their schedule where they just lost the top 2 teams in Class A right now in the last couple of weeks. So I don't know. We'll see. That will be one I'll definitely be tuned into, the Region 3 bracket as we go from here. Let's talk about some Player of the Year contenders in Class A. Isaac Bruns picked up right where Paul Bruns left off. For us, for Midco, Paul Bruns was a 3-time back-to-back Player of the Year in Class A, and I thought this year Isaac Bruns would be good, but he has exceeded all those expectations. Tash Lunday has been outstanding since he was a freshman for Flandreau, and is right there stat-wise with Isaac Bruns. Oliver Vincent came in, an all-state player as a sophomore last year and having an outstanding junior year. His team maybe hasn't pulled out some of those close games. And then you got Blake Volmer, who's the leading scorer for Winter right now, and Winter only has 1 loss on the season. I think those 4 have kind of separated themselves from the rest of the group, Michael.
Yeah, and the 3 players that the 3 first players you mentioned, obviously Isaac Bruns, Tash Lunday, Oliver Vincent. They've obviously had very different sort of ascents to where they are right now. Isaac Bruns, picking up where his brother left off, but a very, very young player. Obviously has a lot of room to grow into his game. Tash Lunday has grown into his game. He's a big guy. He could shoot the 3. He's just played a great. He's just had a great season this year, and is scoring a lot of points and helping Flandreau just become a contender in Class A. And then Oliver Vincent, he really hasn't had the explosive scoring performance that the latter 2 have, but there's really nobody in the state that could pass the ball the way that he does. I mean, there's no looks behind the backs. I mean, I don't he's got to have eyes in the back of his head. I mean, it's unbelievable some of the things that you see just scrolling through Twitter with Oliver Vincent. So yeah, those 3 stand out to me, but those first 2 definitely with those big time scoring performances probably stick out the most.
I think the only other player we could see kind of enter this discussion is if maybe T area goes on fire and Kale Lundeen maybe is the guy that takes him there. Other than that, I think, Isaac Bruns probably with the edge right now, the way he and his team are playing. But A lot of good talent in Class A basketball. Let's move to boys B now, and their regular season's pretty much sewn up. We talked about some of the regions to watch last week. So let's get right to our players of the year, the contenders in Class B right now. And again, Kalen Gary has owned this award the last couple of years, and he hasn't done much to dissuade us from continuing in that direction. But I'll tell you what, Joe Saylor, every time you watch him, you know he belongs in that conversation. And then we're just going to mention a few other players that are playing at an elite level right now. Daniel Mitchell of Gregory, Keyshawn Thigh of Lower Brule, Malik Weaker, Aberdeen Christian, and then a couple of players from Potter County, Grant Lukens, their leading scorer, and then Cooper Logan, who does everything for them. A lot of good players in Class B to talk about, Michael.
Yeah, this is a two-man race though, with Kalen Gary and Joe Saylor. We saw that White River DeSmet matchup earlier in the year, and it lived up to the hype. Obviously, DeSmet had a pretty decent edge in the points battle, but that specific battle between Saylor and Gary was just unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, some of the other players you mentioned, I mean, they're obviously having really great years, but it's just one of those classes where I mean, this is for the smallest class in boys basketball. There's a ton of talent this year. It's pretty unreal. But Kalen Gary has just had an unbelievable year. Obviously, he had a lot of those headline making games and ended up committing to South Dakota State pretty much right after. I mean, he's had a milestone filled year, and I would expect that, he's not really doing much to lose this next milestone too.
I guess the only other guy I would mention is maybe Damon Wilkinson, but he's got obviously a tough task with Kalen Gary on his team in front of him, but he's played at that level where he could be mentioned as well. Like I said, a lot of good players in Class B this year. I was going to look up here. We got Kalen Gary has the most points in individual for a season, individual for a career, field goals made in a career, free throws made, individual career, free throws attempted. Like, he's got pretty much the entire record book for DeSmet right now, and he just continues to impress with basically an undefeated team. He did lose that one game to an Arizona All-Star team, but basically played a challenging schedule and passed every test so far. I agree. Kalen Gary, Joe Saylor, a two-man race, but Kalen Gary firmly in the lead. Move to girls basketball now, and girls AA. We got a couple good games coming up over the next week. There haven't been a lot of top 5 matches over the last 7 days that we want to talk about. But as they jockey for positioning going into this last week, once again, we'll jump right to the player of the year conversation. And you got to start it with Jackalinga Mwenentanda, one of the best players in the nation. And she doesn't necessarily do it scoring every night, but she affects the game in so many different ways. Hannah Ronsick has really stepped up her game as a leading scorer on O'Gorman this year. I think what Jada McNabb has done in Stevens this year has been truly outstanding. She's really been the glue on that team that has kept them together and in contention. They got to the state finals last year, and she was one of the leaders and has come back and done that again. And then Hillary Behrens for Brandon Valley has obviously been in this conversation as well. But right now, for me, Mwenentanda does more for her team than anybody else. What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I think she's one of the best players in the nation for a reason. Jackalinga has, she's had big time scoring performances, but she also rebounds really well and defends really well. There's no more dominant player on both ends of the court than Jackalinga Mwenentanda. Obviously Hannah Ronsick has had some great scoring performances. Jada McNabb just unbelievably poised at the point guard position. Just really, really runs that Stevens offense really well. I mean, she's the thing that she's the player that makes that team tick. I mean, they're good, I think, because of the way that she runs the offense. Obviously, they got some talent around her, but she could score, she could distribute. She's really, really good. And then Hillary Behrens for Brandon Valley. She's been in the race past couple of years, and she's really, really been great for this Brandon Valley team. But with the success of Washington, I think Jackalenga is a very clear choice at this point. But things could change. We still got a couple games left.
I just have to say, out of those 4 contenders we have, I believe that Hillary Barons has stepped her game up to another level. She was good last year, but she really feels like a threat to be one of the best players. And the same with Hannah Ronsick. I think last year she put a lot of pressure on herself to be good without her sister Emma in the lineup. But this year, everything's just flowing much better. She plays much better with Molly than she has in the past. I think she has really stepped up her game. But we both agree that Jackalenga, nobody quite like her in the state. All right, in girls A, same thing. We'll jump right to the player of the year contender list. And man, after I started writing names down, I couldn't stop. This is just like the amount of teams and the contenders we have in Class A. It's the same for the player of the year contender. So if you look at raw scoring and how much a player does for her team, Bella Swedlund definitely deserves to be in the list. Riley Rosenquist has put up amazing stats this year. Riley Haldeman, the leading scorer for West Central on a team that has been outstanding with just one blemish. Emma Yost, the leading scorer on the number 1 team in the state, a team that in Wagner that has so many different options. She's been the go-to girl for them. Cammie Wadsworth in her senior year for Hamlin has been outstanding. Emily Fox, the future SDSU guard, still young and still putting out unbelievable numbers. Claire Shepard, how she affects the game both offensively and defensively for Flandreau. Katie Vasica for T. I mean, T has not really lived up to maybe what we thought they'd be as a team, but Katie Vasica has individually. And Olivia Kiefer from Rapid City Christian doesn't get a lot of pub, but she just goes in, puts up 23, 24 points a night for a team and keeping her team in contention. The future USD Coyote has had a great junior year. And that's honestly scraping the surface. There's a lot of great players in Class A.
Yeah, and this is the class where it really starts to get into the discussion a little bit of, does team success matter? Because the first two you mentioned, Belle Swedlund and Riley Rosenquist, not that they've had bad seasons. It's just there's so many good teams in Class A that they're not even getting votes in the media poll over the past couple of weeks. Winter and Dakota Valley. But then you look at somebody like Riley Haldeman, who, on a West Central team that's sort of been near the top all season, is having an unbelievable year, hitting 3 after 3 and just, really controlling the game. And then same with Emma Yost. But yeah, I mean, it's really interesting because there are so many players that we just mentioned here that you haven't really seen much in the top 5 throughout the year, but there's just so much talent in this class. And, we've talked about it over the past few weeks, and this sort of underscores just how deep this class is and, how many players can just take over a game and maybe steal a region game. And yeah, it's, if I was a team looking to make a run, I would not want to be in girls Class A.
Right. I think this award or this recognition, I guess, is going to be won in the next couple of weeks. And, if a player like Bella Swedlund and Riley Rosenquist, those are the 2 that are, I think, putting up some of the best numbers of anybody. If they get their team, deeper than people expect, they're definitely in the conversation. Otherwise, I think it's going to be the best player on the team that goes all the way, that gets this thing done. And any of these players, I think, have a chance to do that. And right now, I might even be a disservice to pick the leading horse right now coming into the end of this race, because there's just so much wide open territory here yet to be decided. Okay, let's move right to Class B now, and the same thing. They've started the playoffs, and as we narrow down the list of contenders here, Madeline Bragg of Roncalli, best player on the best team, has just had an outstanding week. Put up 31 points and 23 points in her last 2 games against quality competition. And then how about Buchholz out of Dismet? She continues to just amaze. She's an automatic double-double every night, and Kennedy continues to get her team mentioned as one of the elite teams in the state, and she's got a great supporting cast too, and she continues to shoulder the load. How about Avery Broughton coming off, just over a year off of the ACL injury, and continues to lead Corsica Stickney in the right direction. And then Malia Estes, the leading scorer in Class B right now, 28 points per game, almost 10 boards per game for White River. Again, a team that really needed somebody to step up because Kaylin Valander-Prue, the player of the year last year, left White River, and Mal has just been unbelievable for White River. I think this is another wide open race at this point.
Yeah, and you mentioned Kennedy Buchholz. She just became De Smet's all-time leading scorer in girls basketball yesterday, and I believe she did it by scoring like 35 too. So yeah, it's unbelievable some of the numbers that all these players have put up this year. But I mean, 28 points per game from Estes. That's a really, really tough total to meet, especially when there's so many good teams in Class B. But yeah, I don't. This might be the class that I'm similar to girls Class A that I'm most unsure about, just because there's so many teams. Obviously, I think you got to give it to the best player on the best team when it comes down to it. But I think there's some teams that are really, I don't know. It's tough. This one's a tough one.
It is a tough one. I think Madeline Bragg, along with her teammate Morgan Fiedler, have had great years, but they almost, split the load enough where somebody else can come out and take this award. But I'll tell you what, I want Madeline Bragg on my team. She's a real fighter out there, and she has done a great job of putting that team on her shoulders and taking them with big expectations and continuing at number one. So I think Madeline Bragg is definitely right up there. But we forget about Avery Broughton too. I mean, as a sophomore, she was the player of the year in this class, or excuse me, as a freshman. And, she's coming off of an injury, and, that takes some time to get back to 100%. And there's times you see her out there and she plays at 100% and plays like the best player in this class. But it's so hard to recover off of that night after night. And I think that's been the problem. But now as we get deeper into the year and she's, 13 months past her injury, I think she's starting to get stronger and stronger. I could definitely see her making a run in the next month and taking that control as well.
Yeah, and I got to see her in the Hanson Classic, and obviously she played great in that game, but she was still wearing the knee brace. I haven't seen her since then, so I don't know if she shed the brace yet. But yeah, I mean, that was sort of the discussion at the time. I mean, she hadn't even reached the year yet at that point in the season. That was in January, since the surgery. So they were waiting to see at least until she get beyond a year to shed the brace and sort of fully unleash things. But there's a lot of fear that comes with coming back from an injury like that. You don't want to re-injure it, and also at the same time, there are probably some certain things that you haven't done with your leg in quite some time that you're getting used to. Like, there's so many cuts you have to make in a basketball court that, beyond the fear, it's just a difficult move to make when you haven't done it in a really long time. So you could tell that she was hampered by the injury at the time when I watched her in the Hanson Classic, but she's still a really good player. And, if she's fully healthy going into the state tournament, I mean, there's a chance that, she could just go completely off. And obviously Corsica Stickney is right in there and could make a run for the state championship. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting race.
Yeah. She's at 19 points per game right now. And the last time I talked to her, she said, it's not as much of an issue if you're rested, but, between stressing it and then rehabbing it and then getting out there again, it usually takes a few days. So when she plays a couple games in a row, that's when the issues come up with the swelling. But she's gotten better at that even as the year's gone on. So I expect a pretty healthy Avery Broughton down the stretch. It should be a lot of fun. Well, not as many big games to look forward to as we usually have at this time because teams are winding down their season. A lot of teams are done with their seasons, but still a couple interesting matchups. In girls hoops, Washington has a pair of tough games. They go out to Rapid City to take on Stevens and Rapid City Central. Both teams would love to get a win here to get some confidence going into their postseason matchups. And Washington trying to stay at number 1 in the seedings against 2 tough teams down the stretch. And in boys hoops, we got a couple good ones coming up Friday. Mitchell takes on O'Gorman, and that should be a lot of fun. And Aberdeen Central will be in Sioux Falls against Jefferson. Huge game for seeding to try to jockey their way higher and higher in the AA ranks. Lennox is looking for a signature victory. That could happen if they could take out Dakota Valley, as Dakota Valley tries to complete their regular season undefeated. And then Roosevelt at Aberdeen Central next Tuesday. That game got postponed from its original date that was supposed to be played earlier this week. And again, that could go a long way, not only for Roosevelt to cap off an undefeated regular season, but for Aberdeen Central, who's at the 7th spot right now with a couple tough games this week. You know, are they going to stay in that top 8 to get a home game for the Sodak 16 or not? Some good ones this week, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know what happened the last time one of those Sioux Falls area schools took a trip down to Rapid City in girls basketball. So, you know, this is a big test for both Stevens and Central. You know, the last time Brandon Valley came down and they got some really nice wins. Obviously, I think in that same weekend they both took some pretty hefty losses to O'Gorman. But you know, it's always been nice to see, just because, you know, Stevens has been so solid all year. Same with Central. And, you know, this is a chance for them to get, obviously, the marquee win of marquee wins.
Those are big games in the regular season. Of course, there's postseason games going on Thursday. As soon as Thursday, we're going to have teams that will punch their spot in the Sodak 16, so we can start seeding those in Girls A and in Girls B. And there's some good ones to watch. We're not going to go through each and every region, but you know who you are out there with some really fun games here coming up in the next couple of days.
We got a lot to talk about next week.
Yeah, we will. We'll have a lot to break down as we take a look at the Sodak 16 and some of the final matchups in the rest of the classes. What do you got going on, Michael? Argus Leader's always busy this time of year, and you've got a couple different hats, right?
Yeah, obviously Summer League tournaments coming up, so a lot of college stuff and state wrestling this weekend. So, you know, not much basketball for me this week, but you know, I'm excited to get back into it once the playoff games start happening in every single class next week.
And at Midco Sports, we turn our attention to the NSIC tournament, where we cover each and every game out there at the Pentagon. That starts this weekend and it goes through next Tuesday, and all hands on deck. So I'll be a part of that coverage at the Pentagon, and then we will have more with the Summit League coming up the following week. But I definitely will keep up with high school hoops, and we'll be back with one more show next week. And we thank you for watching, and let us know if you have any questions, comments, ideas, and we'd love to start the conversation. We'll see you guys next week.